The new prime was indeed an unusual place compared to other primes, although also strangely familiar at the same time. Many places upon it held the feeling to newcomers of being known to them, as though they had been there prior, but there was no explanation that could be reached for this despite many efforts to arrive at such. The fact of the matter was simply that they had indeed been to these places before, as such locations were in fact those very same places where they had had those feelings. But how? How could they be such? Well, there lay the strangeness of this prime, of its origins and purpose. You see, it had been fashioned in such a way as to enable places from other primes to be here, not recreated in their image, but literally pulled from their respective existences upon their home prime, ripped from one place and placed here, upon their new home, upon this new prime. The creator of this prime was the same who had created all of the ones before, as far back as time would allow one to peer. The gods as they were currently had their creator in Krilsis, and the demons had their source, and the primes had always had, and forever would have, their creator, in what those who knew such things called true prime. It was an identity to try and explain what was responsible, for even the greater gods, despite dealing with this entity, knew not its identity or location, merely that it existed and had the capacity to mould that which would become a new prime from their unknown and immeasurably vast power. Whereas most primes had been born in order to allow life to flourish, expand, and merely exist, this new prime had been created with an intent, a purpose, and as far as anyone could know, this was the first to be made so. Krilsis had been informed of the intent, and had worked alongside the true prime to craft a place that would be touched by life and Krilsis and no other. But although the touch of the all-highest of the gods was to be here, it was to be as an observer and nothing more. Their power was required to ensure that nothing could find it, and it would be beyond the reach of the daemons of all kinds, a role more akin to a protector or caretaker, and as such shielded this place from outside influence. This was achieved by placing it in a region between the planes where the astral could form a cocoon around it, masking it from the gaze of daemonkind, and acting as a natural barrier to ensure this place would remain untainted. To all looking upon it, they would see an ocean of astral energies, a vast sea and nothing more, at least until it was ready for such a time as they had prepared for it. There was, however, one condition that Krilsis had insisted upon, and the source of the primes had agreed to allowing. Although no other gods were to be a part of this place at its inception, they could be introduced at a later time once life was established, but only by the manner which had been agreed upon. They would need to come from a dying or threatened prime, and not by the hand or will of Krilsis. In short, they came with their transplanted lands as hitchhikers and refugees, and not via a packaged escort to spread their word by some formal arrangement. Life flourished upon this new prime for many millennia, allowing the seeded essence of what could be seen of as the wild to also flourish, despite their lack of direct presence at this time. As well the prime creator knew, anywhere life was present, the wild would be there. This was to be the only exception for the ruling of no interference from the gods, although the wild never took a direct hand, and merely granted a seed to furnish the prime with what had been requested. It did, however, mean that when the time would come to reunite this prime with the wild once more, it would be something that could be utilised for what was inevitably to transpire, as planned by the true prime. As nations rose, the first addition to the prime was eventually made. It was the arrival of denizens from a collapsing prime, where, for reasons they would eventually share, many of their deities had cast themselves down en masse and walked amongst the populace of that world. This prime had fought with the Nameless One, and had realised his limitations in their confrontations, despite their overwhelming raw power. They knew how to limit his prowess upon a prime, to prevent his gaining their god's abilities, and although their stepping down from godhood had been a necessity in their fight, the act had merely slowed down their prime's demise, as in the end it had fallen and been consumed in its entirety. But not before those who were chosen of their prime, as well as those who had cast themselves down, were extricated, along with one of their underground citadels, Anakar. The first to join this new prime from another were the first to have stood their ground and fought back against him. The first step in the hopes of this prime had been enacted. As they met with the denizens of the new prime, all went well, and integration was overall good, and with this mixing came the introduction of their god's influences upon this prime, and the first instances of followers to their respective identities, of ones who would normally have been granted power as followers and priests of their faiths, but due to the limitations the true prime had placed, such was not to be. These fallen gods had then sought to reclaim their power by establishing a link to Krilsis, and soon realised that their counterparts within the host of lights could not be reached, and only the faintest touch of Krilsis could be sensed. This meant that despite their kind being given another chance to fight when he would eventually discover them, it also meant that they would have to do so without their prior power. And here such power felt as though it would be limited by an unseen force. Several centuries after accepting this reality, and attempting to fathom how they could protect this prime from his touch, the second arrival occurred, and this one was in no way as smooth as prior.